There's a brand new Star Wars series that just premiered on Disney Plus with the first 2 episodes, but the kind folks over at Disney sent me over the first 3 episodes, and I have my non-spoiler impressions right now. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video I'm very happy to be talking about my thoughts on the first 3 episodes of the new Star Wars series, Star Wars Skeleton Crew. This show has a slew of fantastic directors like John Watts, David Lowery, Bryce Dallas Howard, The Daniels, Jake Schreier, and Lee Isaac Chung, and stars a talented cast of people like Jude Law, Nick Frost, Ravi Kabot-Conyers, Ryan Kiera Armstrong, and many more. And before we get too far into this video, I'd like to say a big thanks to all of you guys for checking out this video, clicking here on my face to hear me talk about some Star Wars, which you guys know is my favorite series of all time. Not just the movies, the books, the comics, the video games, the whole shaboodle. I love Star Wars, and even when there's divisive opinions, I still love talking about Star Wars, even if people wildly disagree with me. So a big thanks to the kind folks over at Disney for sending me over the first 3 episodes of the show to talk about. As of recording this and when this video goes up to you guys when the embargo lifts, the first 2 episodes have premiered on Disney Plus. They sent me over the first 3, so I won't be getting into any spoilers here. This is just going to be my first thoughts and first impressions on the show so far. For anybody who's curious if this is a show that's for them, maybe you don't really know if you should go forward. But if you are a fan of early review content like this and you like movies and TV or Star Wars, definitely consider hitting that subscribe button, as I have weekly early content for movies here on the channel, as well as a slew of retrospective reviews, live streams, and the occasional vlog. With all that said, going into this show, I was pretty excited, but also not really knowing how I was going to feel about it just yet. Watching the trailers, it wasn't a Star Wars series that instantly grabbed me, which for people who know me, is not necessarily something that happens too often. Even the Star Wars projects that I haven't loved have been ones that at least pulled me in from the trailers. And in the case of Skeleton Crew, I thought the trailers looked fun, I thought they looked cute, but it didn't necessarily immediately grip me. And so I was really excited going into it to see if it was going to surprise me, if I was going to feel different. Now, when this show was pitched to audiences years ago at Star Wars Celebration, the base idea of how this was pitched to audiences was that it was going to be very Amblin inspired. So things like Goonies or things like E.T., and another word that was kind of going around, or another phrase for it, was Stranger Things in space. And I think those are all great examples of what this show is in a lot of ways. This is Star Wars taking a page from the classic story of having a group of kids who find themselves on a big adventure that they didn't necessarily sign up for or plan to be on, and end up finding themselves in a lot of danger. If I had to say any of those examples, which one is actually a little bit more in line with Skeleton Crew, I would actually say it's the Goonies, as this show is very pirate-centric, which is something I love in the Star Wars universe. We've seen pirates mentioned over the course of the films, we've seen pirates utilized in things like the live-action shows, as well as things like the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels. We've seen pirates, but a lot of times they tend to have an episode or 2 that focus on pirates, but they never really hone in on a pirate-like story. And so that's exactly what we have here in Skeleton Crew. Now, like I mentioned, I won't be getting into deep spoilers, so you guys don't have to worry about that here. But with the base premise that I can mention here, as far as what this show is all about, is you have a group of kids, and we're going to get into those individual characters in just a second, but you have a group of kids here who live in like a suburban kind of neighborhood in Star Wars, which was cool to see. It very much is inspired by things like E.T. and Goonies, where we have a group of kids who are all in this neighborhood that's very well put together. They're riding around on their speeder bikes that very much feel like the kids riding around on their bikes, and they end up discovering something in the woods near their home that ends up leading them into a ginormous adventure that they were not planning to be a part of. This eventually has them meet up with a droid known as SM-33, played by Nick Frost, who is an old pirate droid, and they now find themselves amidst a pirate adventure that, again, they were not expecting to be on. Amidst this journey, the big name that everybody knows as part of this show is Jude Law, who plays the character of Jod Nanawood. I'm not kidding, that is his name. I love Star Wars, and there are some pretty eclectic names in the world of Star Wars, but Jod Nanawood has to be one of the most Star Warsy Star Wars names I've heard in quite some time. So yes, these kids end up coming into contact with Jude Law's Jod Nanawood, which is probably going to be the last time I say that name in this review. and they end up, working alongside this character that, if you've seen the trailers, is supposedly a wayward Jedi. I won't say much more about his character or what happens in this show, but what happens is a series that very much feels inspired by things like Stranger Things, like E.T., and mostly like the Goonies. And I really appreciated that they leaned heavier into the pirate world of Star Wars. It's something, again, that we don't see in abundance of. There are famous characters that are pirates in the Star Wars world, like Hondo Ohnaka, and other episodes of the Clone Wars and the other various shows that have kind of seeped into that world. There are books and comics that have seeped into that world, but we really haven't had an abundance of shows that have really spent time in the world of pirates. And so to have this show be pretty rooted in the pirate storyline, I thought was really cool and added to some really fun, different dynamic in the world of Star Wars. And speaking about the differences in the world of Star Wars, I mean, this is a show about kids. This is a show that is, in a lot of ways, very lighthearted in the world of Star Wars. Star Wars, in a lot of ways, has always been for kids. That's something that George Lucas has said in so many ways. But, the reality is that Star Wars also has very dark themes. There's been, people being murdered and people being brutally, disfigured and all kinds of things in Star Wars that are not very much for kids, not to mention the very rich and dense political dialogue that tends to be in Star Wars. There are things that I think alienate kids ever so slightly, but I think this show, in a lot of ways, is something that feels a little bit more like it's for a younger audience in the Star Wars world, but also for people like myself, maybe, who grew up with old school shows and movies about these kids who got pulled into a big adventure. And, it kind of feels like a throwback. Even the musical score in this show so far very much feels like a throwback to those old movies of that different time. And so I really enjoy that this show, in a lot of ways, is creating a stamp of being its own different kind of show. I think similar to the other kind of Star Wars shows we've seen in the Disney Plus realm, there's a great use of practical effects and locations used. There's definitely moments where they're using the volume and that the screen behind them, where you can see a little bit of that TV budget from time to time, especially when they're on speeders or different things like that. But for the most part, when it comes down to the production design, similar to things like The Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, all that jazz, the costume and makeup work is great. The special effects across the board look really good in the show. There's a great use of practical effects and locations that I really feel elevate the world of Star Wars, as they typically do. And that's typically something that Lucasfilm and Disney never really skimp on. When people have criticisms about Star Wars, it usually tends to be about the story, less so than about the production value. And I think in the case of this show, you're very much seeing that top tier Star Wars production value that you want to see. But in terms of the show's tone, I am very curious to see how this show works for some and how it's likely not going to work for others, because this is a far more lighthearted show that is about kind of a silly adventure. You have characters here that are pretty silly. There's dialogue that feels very kiddie because these are kids. And since the main characters that we're following here are kids, there is a little bit of that element of these characters. Sometimes some of the performances aren't the greatest. There's an element of their performances that feel a little bit cheesy, but that's not to say that these kids don't give good performances as well. And the best way I can really describe it is that if Andor is the HBO, like, dramatic, dark, adult, more mature Star Wars show, then this is the one that's far more for kids. It's far more on a lower stake level. There are stakes within the show itself, but it doesn't really feel like it's detrimental. And I think one thing that's also important to go into this with, in terms of knowledge on this show, is the fact that this isn't a show that is trying to connect itself to the bigger universe. When you look at all the other shows that we've gotten, even the ones that we thought were going to be disconnected, in a lot of ways, because of the nature of those stories, they still end up kind of rooting themselves in other stories that are part of the Skywalker saga or the various other TV shows. And eventually they all kind of interconnect to some degree, or they're spin-offs of characters from the movies already. In the case of Skeleton Crew, so far, just based on the first 3 episodes, and this will be an 8-episode series, there is an element of this show thus far that just feels like it's really just trying to be its own small-scale story that isn't trying to connect to the bigger universe, that isn't asking you to be invested in the grand stakes of Star Wars, but instead just get invested in a small, cute story with some likable characters and some kids that should not be out there in the world of the pirates of Star Wars. It's interesting because you have the complete duality of the darkness of the world of the pirates, this selfishness, the greed, and then you have these kids who are just trying to get home, that found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time and are regretting so badly that they're a part of this adventure, and they're just trying to get back home. And there are these sweet innocent kids, and at times they try to act tough, but the reality is they're around these much tougher actual individuals. And so that duality I found to be pretty fun while watching the show, and I really just like that this show is kind of cementing itself as something very different in the world of Star Wars. With all that said, having seen the first 3 episodes, full honesty, I can genuinely say that I don't necessarily know that I can say that the first episodes captivated me. I won't say that they riveted me with narrative that really gripped me to what was going on. I enjoyed the first 3 episodes. I am certainly intrigued to see where it goes as a diehard Star Wars fan. I am very curious to see how these characters flesh out over the course of the 3 episodes or the next few episodes after these first 3 episodes. But having seen the first 3 episodes, I can genuinely say I like it. It's enjoyable, it's cool to watch, it's very well made when it comes down to the production side of things, but the story hasn't done anything yet for me to say, I'm in love with this, I can't wait to see what's coming next. There is a part of me that's like, all right, this could go either way. I really enjoyed what I saw so far, but some of the characters are a little bit annoying, some of the characters are likable, some of the characters are cute, but none of them have done anything on a story level yet for me to feel emotionally invested beyond it just being like, this is a Star Wars series that I'm curious to see where it goes. So that's going to be my first impressions, but quickly, lastly, before we end this video, I do want to talk about some of the main characters and give my first impressions and my thoughts on them, and then we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and I'll see you guys when the series comes to an end, and I'll do a full, proper review with spoilers and all that jazz when the time comes. This is just the first impressions. I'm still very open to seeing what happens. I can make the next video and not be a fan of how the series ended, kind of like The Acolyte. If you saw my review for that, I enjoyed the first 4 episodes when I got to check those out early, but I wasn't really the biggest fan of how it wrapped up. And while I liked a lot about that show and I wasn't on the hate train that many people were on, I ultimately came to a place where by the time it came to an end, I just feel like they kind of lost steam and they never really realized the potential of that show on a story level. And I'm hopeful that that doesn't happen here with Skeleton Crew, but I'm going into it with nothing but positivity. So with all that said, let's talk about some of the characters and then we'll wrap this up. The main kid that we really focus on at the beginning is the character of Wim, played by Ravi Cabot-Conyers. And he is a character that is adventurous. He's the one that wants the adventure the most. He's absolutely in love with the ideas of the Jedi and people being out there saving the world and being able to be this awesome character in the world of the Star Wars. He's got like storybooks that he's kind of like flipping through over the course of the first couple episodes that kind of like, you know, allow him to visualize these epic adventures of the Jedi. And so he's a character that is endearing in a lot of ways, but ultimately is a character that I would say I found myself a little annoyed by as the series was going on, the first 3 episodes, because he's so adamantly trying to be this character that can become a Jedi or be on this adventure that he's ultimately a little bit cringe at times. The kid who plays him is a sweet kid, you can tell, and you can tell that he's just doing his job here, and I think he does a solid enough job. He's playing the character as he's written, but the character so far is a little bit annoying, and he hasn't done enough for me to really be in love with him, but I by no means dislike the character. He's just the one that I would say is annoying me the most so far. One of the cooler characters in the mix, though, is the character of Fern, played by Ryan Kira Armstrong, who is definitely the toughest of the group. She's the classic archetype of the girl who's in the group, who's tougher than most of the guys in the group, or all of the guys. She's the one who is kind of better at bullshitting themselves out of situations and kind of always has the right thing to say, and is a little bit more headstrong in moments. She's the character I'm looking forward to seeing more of as the episodes go on, because without a doubt, she was the one that stood out to me as one of the cooler characters in the bunch. Now, the character I found myself loving the most, though, was Robert Timothy Smith as Neil, who initially I thought was of the same species as Max Rebo, but it turns out from the creators that he's not. I'm guessing it's some sort of relation to that same species, but apparently is not the same species. But he's cute. And mind you, this is the kid who's in a practical costume. There are digital enhancements to bring the character to life, but I really love the look of this character. It's great to have an alien character as one of the main characters of these kids. He's cute. His personality is so like funny because he's kind of the nerdy one of the group. He's the one who does not want to be on this adventure the most. He wants to get home. He wants to do good in school. He's completely questioning why he's on this adventure. He's that classic nerdy kid in this kind of archetypal group of kids who does not want to be a part of this adventure whatsoever, but he's super cute and funny at times. And I thought the fact that they made him this alien species was really, really solid. I love the look of the character. I love that it's a practical costume that he's wearing as well. And it just made me more and more endeared to him as the episodes went on. He hasn't really been giving a rich amount of story just yet, but I without a doubt found him to be the most cute and likable character of the bunch so far. Now, a character that I like, but I can't necessarily say I love, is the character of KB, played by Kiriana Crater. And she's a character who, similar to Lobot from Empire Strikes Back, has like a, cybernetic enhancements on the back of her head. She's very useful throughout the course of the show, and I think she's a cool character in concept. I think her hairstyle and maybe just the performance of the young actress comes off a little bit cringy, but with all that said, it is a kid's show in a lot of ways. It is a show about kids, and so I'm trying not to be too negative in that way. I want to be very open to see where this goes. I think she's a cool character in concept, so I am excited to see where they go moving forward, but similar to some of the other characters, I don't think that this story so far in the first 3 episodes has done an abundance to give them a lot of meat on the bone just yet. It feels like the first couple episodes, the first few that I've seen, very much were about kind of setting up the universe that they're in, setting up the stakes of the danger, and more than anything, setting up the next character, which is Jude Law's character, Jod Nanawood. This is definitely the last time I'm going to say his name. And he's an interesting character because you don't fully know how you're supposed to feel about him at first. Is he sketchy? Is he, rooted in this pirate world? Is he this trustworthy Jedi who's wayward and, they don't know if they should work with him or not work with him? I think that Jude Law is always a likable and charming actor, and I think he brings that to this role. I'm certainly curious to see what they do with his character moving forward, as he's the character I think that has a little bit more, the most weight so far. A character that there's a lot of ambiguity around him, but he's without a doubt the one that you're curious to learn the most about as you're watching the show, because there is so much mystery around him. And then lastly, I mentioned him earlier, but you have the character of SM-33 played by Nick Frost, who is this pirate droid that the kids come across who ends up working alongside them, and he's just fun. He's got the classic pirate voice in the show. He's cool looking, he helps the kids in some dangerous situations, and he kind of reminds me of like a pirate version of K2SO. Not as much of that, kind of sarcastic kind of wit that K2SO has, but a little bit more of just like a straight kind of brute pirate kind of character. And I really enjoy his kind of overall tone and vibe in this show so far. So that's going to be my thoughts on the first 3 episodes of what I've seen of Skeleton Crew. Overall, as a Star Wars fan, I think there's a lot to enjoy here. I think it's a very well-made show in a lot of ways when it comes down to the production value and the performances. Again, when it comes down to the performances, though, it is a show mainly focused on kids. So there are moments where some of the lines and some of the moments of their performance are a little bit cheesy, but I feel like it kind of leans into the tone and the charm of what this kind of show is going for. As a fan of things like E.T. and Stranger Things and Goonies, like I mentioned before, this very much feels in line with those things. So I am excited to see what they do. And more than anything, I kind of can appreciate a Star Wars show that's taken us to a smaller scale. It's not asking you to worry about where Luke Skywalker is and all these other big characters. And instead just be like, hey, listen, here's a small scale story in a universe you love in a galaxy far, far away. And so that's how I'm kind of approaching it right now. Again, I'm not in love with what I've seen so far, but I liked it. I'm enjoying it, and I'm curious to see where they go moving forward. So that's going to be my thoughts on the first 3 episodes of Skeleton Crew. Leave some comments down below. Did you watch the first 2 episode premiere? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Are you planning to check this show out? Or are you going to miss this show? Whatever the case may be, I look forward to various opinions. Based on how previous Star Wars videos have done here on the channel, I'm sure there's going to be some negativity in the comments. So let's try to keep it as peaceful as we can. But if people want to come in here with the craziness, then may the force be with us all. A big thanks to you guys for watching. Bye-bye.